Hello, my friends, and I hope you're having a fantastic day. We had a great stream last night. Thank you so much, everyone who stopped by. We will be doing it again next week, 7 p.m. on Thursday, so stop by if you get a chance. When looking for a topic to talk about today, I managed to stumble across this article, and it's interesting, to say the least. This is the Northeastern Global News, which appears to be some kind of college newspaper for Northeastern University or something like that. Tried to find an about section, but didn't have any luck. However, the article they published, DragonAge the Veilguard, represents everything wrong with the gaming industry, just not for the reason you might expect. And of course, that title caught my interest because, a lot of times you read that kind of title, and especially in our current state, the first thing I think is, okay, so they're going to blame gamers. Because, we as gamers think everything wrong with the industry is because they're not listening to the players, they're putting in too much identity politics, bad writing, bad graphics. I mean, the things I think are wrong with DragonAge are almost endless at this point in time. And the things that are wrong with the gaming industry, we've talked about that a number of times. The byline is the upcoming DragonAge the Veilguard is make or break for renowned game studio BioWare, plagued by recent failures. Its troubled development is also an indictment of big budget development, an expert says. Now, their expert is an assistant teaching professor of game design at Northeastern University named Fox Zero. This article talks about how the Veilguard has gotten early praise from critics, BioWare's recent failures, Anthem and Andromeda. But Fox goes on to say that the game has become very representative of the turmoil of the industry, citing the game's troubled development, the executive staff turnover, multiple significant shifts in the creative vision that prolonged the development, layoffs, and a name change. And it's a checklist of the worst parts of big-budget AAA game development. She goes on to say, if it's struggling, if it's received very, very poorly, my only hope is that it's seen as a symptom of the industry and not, it turns out there was no BioWare magic, Zero says. I mean, there wasn't. That's flawed in and of itself. But I think a lot of people are quite tired of the AAA sphere. Yet there are not a lot of openings for that to change. I definitely disagree with that last sentence. There are plenty of openings for everything to change. Every indie developer out there is an avenue for change in regards to gaming. But we can go on forever about how the gaming market isn't quite what some people seem to think it is. Zero claims to be a longtime fan of the series. She, like many of us, believe the game likely wouldn't ever see the light of day. Part of the reason for that is the team working on the entry would be pulled away to work on other projects. The change from MMO to single player, which, honestly, I was thrilled about. I didn't really want an MMO or a multiplayer game. I'm not exactly happy with what they're going with either, just because it's not the kind of game I'm willing to play, thus I won't be playing it. Apparently, according to Kotaku, BioWare was also struggling to maintain the core of DragonAge, a single-player, narrative-driven role-playing series amid financial pressures from its publisher, EA. Now, we all know that EA is very much into the microtransaction industry, the Madden games, Battlefield, season passes, that kind of thing. Remaking the same game over and over again and reskinning it barely with new players in the teams. I've never understood that about the sports games. I understand wanting the new players or the new rosters for the new year. I don't understand why it had to be a new game every year, other than to make people continue to purchase it. In the world of DLCs and pushing updates and the way they can massively change a game now, just through a download. The fact that they continue to convince people they have to buy a new year of the game year after year, y'all have basically been paying a yearly service fee to access your sports games. I get playing the sports games, they're fun. I don't get paying for them over and over just for something that barely changes. That's the part I never understood. When was the last time a sports game really innovated anything? Y'all deserve better. Now, I find her take on the overall state of the games industry here, where the article says, in a sea of free-to-play, microtransaction-driven multiplayer games that keep players engaged for years, the Veilguard is an odd duck. That's not really true. Yes, there are a lot of free-to-play, microtransaction, multiplayer games out there, but there are still a lot of single-player games. This year has been filled with a number of them. Nintendo does a ton of single-player games. Single player experiences have still been coming out. Now, they probably aren't coming out as much as they used to, but I wouldn't say that gaming is really shifting only to free-to-play microtransactions or only to free-to-play multiplayer. There's a lot of it, but that is really only for a certain subsection of gamers. There are, of course, gamers who love the free-to-play multiplayer games, and that's because of the type of play style they have. I'm not someone you will find playing a lot of free-to-play multiplayer games because I more prefer the single-player experience. I am always more interested in a narrative single-player game than I am in a multiplayer game or even a co-op game. I like them, and I will play them with my friends for periods of time, but overall, I'd generally rather play alone. And of course, EA is not exactly known at this stage for its single-player games. She goes on to say DragonAge doesn't fit the formula for typical live service games or games as a service product. They really make wonderful narrative RPGs where mostly people are concerned about who it is that they can kiss and which mage is going to betray you, which that hurts me on a deep level. That really isn't what I'm concerned about in the Dragon Age games. What I'm concerned about in the Dragon Age games is how are we going to resolve the Blight? My major concern after Inquisition is how am I going to stop Solus from collapsing the Veil into the regular plane? Yeah, I mean, sure, he split it, but putting them back together is just going to cause more damage. You're basically talking a Thanos-level event. And then, of course, the Veilguard came out, and now I don't even care where the story's going because they're making it seem like everything I've done in the past doesn't matter. There's so much more to worry about in these games than who you kiss. The political intrigue, the actual story behind saving the entire world, or I guess in the entire country, leading eventually to the world, is more the focus of these games, in my opinion. But we all have the things we love in a game. And yes, there are plenty of people out there who are far more worried about who they can kiss than they are about the actual game itself. Zero goes on to say, if the Veilguard is not the bloated corpse of everything EA wants and manages to hit with players, it would be a much needed win for the Dragon Age series and BioWare as a whole. But with EA eyeing its bottom line, if the Veilguard fails commercially or with fans, it could also be a nail in the coffin for BioWare. Zero says she wants the Veilguard to be a wake-up call for players to start pushing back against games with ballooning budgets, diminishing employee numbers, and often tough labor conditions. The hope, Zero says, is that the conversation around the Veilguard doesn't stop at the game itself, but extends to the human toll of its development. BioWare laid off 50 people in 2023, including veterans with 20 years of experience at the studio. Now, the reason they did that is because veterans cost more and very likely didn't want to push it the direction that they wanted to go with it. And here's the issue. On one hand, she's talking about pushing back against games with ballooning budgets. But at the same time, she doesn't want the diminishing employee numbers. If you don't want the large budgets, you have to cut that somewhere. And part of that is in how many people you're paying to develop the game. Let's not forget, we just recently talked about Bethesda and their overly large, complicated team that's not allowing people to communicate, making the game worse. So the conversation does need to remain about the games, because if you want people to have better working conditions, better jobs, to get paid for the jobs they're doing, then they absolutely need to be making games that people like and want to pay for. They need to be able to communicate with each other. They need to be working in teams of reasonable sizes with clear communications, with budgets that are recoupable in regards to how many copies you're going to sell. The fact that now these budgets are getting so big that the only way they can possibly break even is if the game is a supermassive hit. That's one of the major problems. But they have to have a budget that big because they've ballooned the number of their employees to the point of ridiculousness. You can't have both. It's not possible. Or if you do get both of those things, then you are going to lose in another arena. And in this case, that means you lose money. And if you lose money, eventually everything else isn't sustainable. Zero says players are starting to identify these games are expensive and that they're not really what I'm asking for. It's more of the same or has all these microtransactions. There are these little pain points that haven't been fully connected to the larger issue of labor. My hope genuinely is that the team that has worked on this project on and off for 10 years is not suffering immensely. I don't need it to be critically acclaimed. I just need them to still have jobs after this. And I need them to make better games. You know, I guess maybe she's coming from a much more compassionate point than I am in this case. And I normally would commend someone for being a compassionate person. But when you are talking about trying to be compassionate to the point that you are causing problems, that's not compassion, that's stupidity. Research suicidal empathy if you want a good idea of what caring too much without really caring can do to you. Their expert, so to speak, definitely has a much more human-based concern on this that I definitely disagree with. And maybe that sounds like a bitch, but I am a bitch sometimes. It's just who I am. I would like people to be able to have jobs and work and survive. However, they need to do jobs they're good at, and they need to provide a service that people want to pay them for. If they are going to develop a game that is awful, then they need to find new jobs. They need to go fund their own studios or something, which a number of these veterans that she's concerned about have indeed started their own gaming companies. A number of them have gone off and started their own studios, creating their own games, which I'm playing one of them right now. Nightingale is Aaron Flynn, and he's done an amazing job so far. It's an early release, so there's still a lot of things to be smoothed out and decided on, new systems to be built, but I'm having a blast in it. The funny thing here is that this title is completely wrong. It is for all the reasons that we expect, because the reasons she talked about were monetization, not being popular enough, development issues. Those are all things that gamers talk about. Those are the things that we believe in. So I'm not sure what they think the reader is supposed to think the reasons are. Unless, of course, they're assuming that the only reason the reader thinks their problems with the game industry are things like identity politics. And while I do not deny that they are definitely an issue, I think the bigger issues are the fact that they don't care about the games anymore, and we're having to deal with these large corporate structures that don't care about anything except for what they think is going to make them money. The first time I read through the article, I got to the end here where she's talking about, I don't need it to be critically acclaimed. I just need them to still have jobs after this. I'm not sure what she's saying she wants people to do, because on one hand, she's talking about wanting players to push back against games, but wanting these people to still have jobs. So if they want the players to push back against the games, there's really only one way we have to do this, and that is to not buy the game. If we don't buy the game, the developers don't get the money, and they can't continue paying for people, and more people get laid off. If they're good employees, they can find jobs elsewhere. And that's the only way there really is to fix this, is to speak with our money, because just talking about it, just complaining about it and still giving them our money isn't going to change anything, because that's what they want, is they want the money and absolutely nothing else. In the end, this article kind of leaves me a little confused, because there's so much that this game shows is still wrong in the industry, and I will be watching the release with interest. I don't know if it'll break even. I think breaking even is about all they can ask for, but I don't know if it'll get that far. I used to be pretty certain that, yeah, they probably will. But as things continue to get tighter in terms of individual budgets, and you go into the holiday portion of the year, people aren't going to be as willing to spend their money right out the gate. So unless it's wildly popular with the people who like the type of gameplay it currently employs and the art style, basically people who aren't me, or it finds itself an entirely new fan base right out the gate, I don't know. I just don't know, guys. But what do you think? Are you as confused about this article as I am? Because, I don't know, the whole thing just feels weird. It feels like she's trying to say a lot of the same things we do, but then turning around and saying that she doesn't want to see the consequences of their actions appear. It's confusing. Catch me tonight on my friend Samiel the Infamous's channel. We will be hanging out for a while, and I will have the link to that in the description if you want to stop by and join us. That's 9:30 p.m. Mountain Time, I believe. That'll be a good time. But as always, I'm looking forward to reading your thoughts down in the comments, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please like, comment, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. If you really liked it, you can feel free to share it around, and I will catch you later.